The Dead Sea Scroll calendar predicted this moment 2,000 years ago. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd accidentally discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, ancient manuscripts preserved for nearly 2,000 years in caves near the Dead Sea, just 1 year before Israel was re-established as a nation in 1948. And by the end of this video, you will find 5 things from these scrolls that may shed light on our current prophetic timeline and how ancient texts could connect to modern world events. Number 1. The hidden Jewish sect. To understand what the Dead Sea Scrolls reveal, you first have to understand who wrote them. Because these scrolls didn't fall from the sky. They weren't written by angels. They were written by men, a specific community of Jewish men who lived, worked, prayed, and studied in one of the most remote and inhospitable places on the face of the earth. And their story, who they were, why they separated from everyone else, and what they believed was coming, is the foundation of everything we're about to uncover. They're called the Essenes, and almost no one talks about them. You've heard of the Pharisees, the religious conservatives of ancient Judaism, obsessed with the letter of the law, famous for their confrontations with Jesus. You've heard of the Sadducees, the priestly elite, politically connected, theologically liberal, controlling the temple and its rituals. These two groups dominate most people's understanding of the religious landscape in Jesus' day. But there was a third group, a group that both the Pharisees and the Sadducees despised, a group that rejected the entire religious establishment, not from the outside, but from the inside, a group that believed the temple in Jerusalem had been corrupted, that the priesthood had been compromised, that the calendar used by mainstream Judaism was wrong, fundamentally, spiritually, catastrophically wrong, and that God's judgment was not distant, but imminent. The Essenes. They lived in a community called Qumran, perched on the arid cliffs above the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea. If you've ever seen pictures of the region, you know it's one of the most barren, desolate landscapes on the planet. Cracked earth, blinding sun, caves carved into limestone ridges that look like the surface of another world. And in that wilderness, deliberately, intentionally, sacrificially, the Essenes built a life. Historical accounts from 3 ancient writers, the Jewish historian Josephus, the philosopher Philo of Alexandria, and the Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder, describe the Essenes in remarkable detail. They numbered approximately 4,000. They lived communally, sharing property, sharing meals, sharing labor. Some branches practiced celibacy. They wore white garments. They immersed themselves in ritual baths daily. They studied scripture from before dawn until after sunset. They rejected wealth. They rejected luxury. They rejected anything that distracted from one singular, all-consuming purpose: preparation. Because the Essenes didn't separate from society because they were misanthropes or recluses. They separated because they believed something with every fiber of their being, something that shaped every hour of every day of their existence. They believed the end was near. Not in some vague, general, the world is getting worse kind of way. They believed it with mathematical specificity. They believed they could see it in the cycles of Scripture. They believed they could calculate the approach of the Messiah, the final judgment, and the restoration of all things using a system that God Himself had embedded in the Torah, a system that mainstream Judaism had abandoned, corrupted, or forgotten. And here's what should make you lean forward, because this is the detail that separates the Essenes from every other apocalyptic group in ancient history. They didn't think they were early. They thought they were late. They believed the clock was already past the point most people assumed. They believed the appointed time was closer than anyone in Jerusalem realized. And they believed that the religious leaders who ran the temple, the very men who were supposed to be watching for the Messiah, had lost track of when he was coming, because they were using the wrong calendar. That conviction, that mainstream Judaism was running on the wrong clock, is the key to everything the Dead Sea Scrolls reveal, and it's the reason they rejected the system everyone else followed and built one of their own. But before I show you that calendar, and before I show you why their calculations point to our generation, there's one more piece of their story you need to hear. By the middle of the 1st century, the Roman Empire was tightening its grip on Judea. Tensions between Jewish communities and Roman authorities were rising toward a breaking point. The Essenes, watching from their desert cliffs, could see the trajectory. Not just politically, but prophetically. They knew what was coming. Not because they had spies in Rome, because they had scrolls in their caves. Jerusalem was going to fall. The temple was going to be destroyed. The system that mainstream Judaism depended on, the sacrifices, the priesthood, the festival calendar, was going to be wiped from the face of the earth. And when that happened, when the fires came and the walls crumbled and the temple was reduced to rubble, someone would need to carry the truth forward. Someone would need to preserve the real calendar, the real timeline, the real understanding of God's prophetic clock. So they took their most precious possessions, their scrolls, their commentaries, their calendrical documents, their prophetic writings, and they sealed them in clay jars, and they carried those jars deep into the caves that lined the cliffs above their community, and they hid them, not carelessly, not in haste, with deliberation, with purpose, with the conviction that these documents were not just important for their generation, but essential for a future generation that would need them. And then the Romans came. In 68 AD, the Roman 10th Legion swept through the region. Qumran was destroyed. The community was scattered. The Essenes, as an organized movement, vanished from history. But the scrolls remained, sealed in darkness, waiting. For nearly 2,000 years, 1 year apart, after nearly 2 millennia of silence, the scrolls that a hidden Jewish sect preserved for a future generation, scrolls containing a prophetic calendar that maps the entire arc of human history, were found in the exact generation that saw the most significant prophetic event since the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the restoration of Israel, the return of the Jewish people to their ancient homeland, the fulfillment of Ezekiel 37, the valley of dry bones coming to life, and the scrolls that had been waiting in those caves, the documents that contain the calendar